Okay, welcome back everybody to the Real-Time Payments Summit, virtual this year, and for the afternoon session. We're going to start off with a panel discussion, broadening the context of real-time payments to cover Oceania. And to help us talk about that broader piece, we have Katrina Stuart, Head of Engagement at the New Payments Platform, Steve Wiggins, Chief Executive of Payments New Zealand, Julie Bolan, Director of Payment Markets Oceania at Swift, and Christian Westerlind Wigstrom, CEO of Monoova. So welcome everybody to this afternoon session. As in previous sessions today, you will be able to ask questions by using the chat box on the platform, and they'll be passed through to us. So I might start, as we're stretching our wings with Steve, and start off by describing for us the current state of real-time payments in New Zealand.
Great, thank you, Lance. So it's probably the best way to describe that would be a ever-increasing loud beep on our radar, would be that. So if we look at our current retail payment system, that's called settlement before interchange. That is a batch system that goes into bank every 2 to 3 hours, with most banks settling every 30 minutes. But then we look at the broader landscape, there is a mix, if you like, of real-time solutions out there for consumers, whether that's on-us type transactions, whether that's the online EPOS, and also, for example, we had a peer-to-peer solution using QR code launch into the market last Friday. So they are starting to come through, but it's fair to say that the core system at the moment is still a 5-day batch, looking to move that through to 7 days, but very much loud and clear on our radar.
And what do you think the re-election of the Labor government is going to do to that? Because they seem to have a focus on reducing the cost of payments and making the system more efficient.
Yes, correct. And it's interesting, off the back of that, we've also had a change of minister as well on the way through. And so who was previously in charge of this, Minister Farfoy, that's now moved on. And we've now got Minister Clark to overlook that. Having said that, there has been a very high interest within the payment system from subsequent governments as well. So I think what it's clear, both with government and also the regulator, is that issues like open banking, real-time payments, moving our existing system to 7 days is already a priority for them. And I think that will continue to go. The other lens will be, for me, in terms of the role that the payment system and solutions plays in the economic recovery that we're all going through post-COVID. So I think that too will also heighten some awareness and attention on the payment system. So it's fair to say, from a real-time payments point of view, it's very much a hygiene factor as we view it now. And you don't need to look far to see what's happening and what those trends are in terms of that expectation of 365 days a year, 24/7 instantaneous payments. So I think the government will look at that and say, right, we need to catch up. And they'll also look at it in the context of a number of digital trade-based agreements that have been reached across jurisdictions, including Oceania as well. So I think it's very relevant.
And obviously in Australia, we've got new infrastructure to support the 24/7 architecture. Katrina's company running that, Julie's company an integral part of that. Are we going to see the same new infrastructure built in New Zealand, or are you going to use what you have today and upgrade?
I think probably the latter. We'll look to see what we can leverage from the existing system. So we're currently in consultation with the industry in terms of what is the right outcome for us. So a little bit early to say exactly what that may look like. Having said that, it would certainly be adopting the same characteristics in terms of most other real-time deployments in other regions.
And Katrina, we've got many companies operating across the Tasman, both in Australia and New Zealand. Are there opportunities in terms of companies and the banks being ready across both countries?
I think there are, like, as you say, there are many companies that are operating across both. And I think also, as we kind of touched on this morning, there's also some common initiatives happening across the different markets as well. So, e-invoicing is a great example of that as well, where you've actually got both governments in Australia and New Zealand trying to push that in terms of the market adoption. And I think there's opportunities really about kind of from a market education perspective and really working with the corporate market to talk about the benefits of real-time payments. What are the specific use cases? Actually sharing some real-life case studies as well, because we've certainly found in Australia that the more you can actually share some of those real examples, like Lisa was talking about with, say, Chubb earlier this morning, just makes it so much more powerful to bring those benefits to life to the corporates. And I think working through with corporates in terms of what it might mean for their payment processes and the reporting and the data. Obviously, there's going to be some differences in terms of what that means for corporates in the different markets, but I think there's a lot of similarities as well. I think there's also opportunities to look at how do we ensure there's interoperability between both Australia and New Zealand. So in terms of kind of data formats and mapping and the use of data fields in the payment message. And again, I think that will be kind of a really important piece of work when you look at opportunities such as e-invoicing. And so certainly in the Australian market, we've been looking at how we work closely with the ATO, who's rolled out the PEPL framework, to look at how do you make sure that PEPL's interoperable with the NPP. And I think now it's kind of like, how do you actually also then make sure that that's interoperable with what's happening in New Zealand? I think aside from the corporates, I think there's also actually a number of key stakeholders who will play a really important role in both markets as well, and who will play a role in enabling those corporate customers. So the likes of your ERP system providers, cloud accounting software providers and technology solution providers, and working with them across both sides of the Tasman to see how they uplift their product and service offerings for real-time payments will be important in both markets. Okay.
And Christian, your business has been active in real-time payments in the Australian market. What have you seen since launch, and what benefits are you bringing to the marketplace?
So, as you say, we've been active for about a year and a bit by now, maybe 14, 15 months since going live with Katrina's MPPA. It is an interesting part to see from such a close distance. So I think MPP went live February 18, so it's about 2.5 years ago now, 2.5 years ago. And certainly the perception in the market, rightly or wrongly, has been that it was initially at least a peer-to-peer thing. It was very, very easy to move funds to your friend for paying that dinner and saying thank you, and you could put an emoji on it. A lot of conversations in the early days was very much around the consumer retail use case. I think that's changed. It's changed in part because as consumers, we experience something and then we sit behind our desks and we sort of want the same things to still work in terms of our business or professional experiences, and we don't understand why can I send money very, very quickly in real time to my friend, but I can't send it to my supplier. So that's one way. But another one is also the sort of supply, that's the demand side of things. But the supply side has also changed. The way that MPP was rolled out in Australia was very much starting with retail accounts, moving into SME, and then corporate accounts, and then institutional accounts, and you sort of went along. And with both an easier access through supply of MPP-enabled accounts and the demand that we're getting increasingly used to real-time payments, we're seeing less and less of a need to educate people of the reasons why real-time is something you should aspire to and why that is a good thing. I would say that until quite recently, and by that I mean just in the last sort of 12 months, you somehow still had to explain the benefits of real-time payments, and I don't think that's the case anymore. Most people are now saying, obviously, it should be moving real-time. It is no longer a luxury item, it's a must-have, or at least an expected have. And that really has changed, I think, our conversations as Monoova. So Monoova is a payments service provider. We help our clients who are Australian businesses. We don't service consumers accessing a multiple of payment methods, including MPP. That's important to us. And for us, the role that we play in one of our core value propositions is that we make MPP useful by connecting it straight to, as Katrina was saying earlier, accounting softwares, ERP, their own software environments, whether those are apps or websites, whatever it is. We make MPP go all the way in. So I've said in the past, MPP can sometimes feel a bit like a very, very quick piece of railway infrastructure that ends 300 meters from the platform if you are a corporate, because you receive funds very quickly, but you need a person who sits at your portal to see, got funds, got funds. It's sort of, you need someone to be manually looking at the funds as they come in. And if you can build those last 300 meters, and we do that through APIs and webhook access to what is a very, very strong piece of infrastructure, then the real-time experience goes all the way. It goes all the way into your ERP. You can immediately update balances. You can send messages to your payers and say, thank you very much for paying $100. And you can send us instructions what to do with those funds. Maybe move the funds out immediately and pay your supplier immediately in real time. So we sort of build those last 300 meters of rail on either side of the platform.
Very good. And Julie, if New Zealand's going to have a different architecture, a different system to Australia, what does that mean for Swift's strategy across the two countries?
Look, I think a really good example, and to add to what Katrina was speaking about in regards to interoperability, is that both countries are currently going through ISO 20022 industry programs at the moment, and they're really uplifting their real-time gross settlement systems to ISO 20022. Australia's already done that, obviously, with NPP, so they've kind of got a front foot forward and really understand how to leverage that capability. But ISO 20022 will really drive that interoperability across organisations, across banks, across different infrastructures, and it links together the domestic payment rails, links together the cross-border payment rails, and links together corporates and banks and organisations in a more seamless and structured way, and really helps to remove some friction, really helps with straight-through processing, helps with data analytics, reduces costs, and really drives out some of the complexity that comes with the siloed approach of having different systems and different payment standards. But just from a Swift strategy perspective, and not going into too much detail because Michael's going to speak about this next on the agenda, the strategy in a nutshell is really to transform Swift's platform to orchestrate instant and frictionless payments. We want to help financial institutions accelerate growth in international payments. And we really want to pivot to retail and make the experience just as good as it is for wholesale payments as it is for those retail payments. We're really going to build on our strong foundations as a global cooperative, and we're going to look to provide more mutualised services like financial crime and compliance at the centre. So really focusing a lot on providing those screening services, whether it's fraud, whether it's transaction monitoring, whether it's sanctions, at a much more mutualised and centralised approach. And of course, as I said at the beginning, ISO 20022 is really the foundational key to bringing all of that together. So providing rich data services to really reduce that operational complexity and cost. I think, just to kind of sum it up, the new platform is really moving away from Swift's message-centric model, and we're going to put transactions at the centre, and we're going to maintain a golden copy of that transaction, and we are going to leverage the things that we've built on today, like GPI, and really drive that end-to-end customer experience across the platform as well.
And Steve, when do we expect to see real-time payments in New Zealand? And is there anything that we can do to accelerate that?
I think there's certainly enough pressure coming on just with market forces and also consumer expectations. So I think there's a natural tension there that's going to geared along some of the points made about ISO 20022 with high value. We're working just behind, probably a couple of weeks behind the Australian schedule on that. So I think that's been really progressive. So, and also we've just been released to the market a payments modernisation plan, which is seeking to get some feedback from the market in terms of exactly when on the roadmap should this occur. So we've moved past the should we, shouldn't we, to this is hygiene, yes, we've got to do it, just a matter of when and how from here on in.
And when you think about New Zealand at merchant level, at point of sale, you've got merchants there getting domestic debit payments free of charge, at least they consider it free of charge. How can something like real-time payments ever compete with something that's being given away? Yeah,
interesting point. And so it's just a matter of how long that will last. So we've got certainly signals from the new government around the regulation of interchange. And so we'll see what rolls out over the next first sort of 6 months of their office from that point of view. It's always been a challenge in terms of how can you charge nothing and then still keep investing on that actual product itself. So there's been sort of a natural decline, if you like, from a product point of view of that. It's fair to say with the API work that we've been doing through our API centre, the payment initiation API, we would hope to see some payment-related in-store solutions getting to market through there. So time will tell where that sits from a pricing point of view. But I think there are enough things happening to say, yeah, we will be able to provide an alternative. And I think consumers are also looking for that choice as well. And so it'll be interesting to see how much that consumer will actually drive the demand for greater choice.
And Lance, can I
sort of, yeah.
Yeah, I'd actually love to jump in there. And I think what Steve's bringing up here and what you prompted is a really interesting conversation and something that certainly isn't unique to New Zealand. I think we'll see that in the world at large. Increasingly, we are expecting transactions to be for free. As consumers, we generally don't think something should cost something when we move our own money, whether it's between our own bank accounts or we pay our bills or our friends, whatever it is, someone else sort of puts that bill. And I think that there is a real move towards that also among businesses, again, because we sort of import our consumer behavior and expectations into our business lives. And so the value proposition, I think, is very quickly going to move away from being someone who can move money from A to B. A lot of people can move money from A to B. To instead being about how do we move that money from A to B? What are the value add services? I mean, APIs, I think, are it's not like a new thing, but it's still a new thing in financial services to a degree that is maybe surprising at points. Being able to get funds quickly, I think there are people who are going to say, sure, it costs me nothing to do direct debits, and but it takes a bit longer for whoever's need to get it, but I would be actually willing to pay for just a slightly better experience overall. And again, who foots the bill will probably be very much a conversation for specific context, but over and over again it will come down to the value propositions around the movement of funds, where the movement of funds is just taken for granted, and whether that is real time or batch earlier on. It is, can you provide accurate reporting? Can you give reconciliation that really matters? Can you provide reconciliation that keeps the real-time experience going? It's not just to receive funds in real time and sort of the train actually arrives at the platform inside your ERP, but also once it's there, it gets reconciled in real time. Because again, if you have money but you don't know what it's for, then it's as if you didn't have the money. You can't really do anything with it. And I think that's something that came through also the payment times bill that came through here in Australia, where the government is really asking larger corporates to make sure they pay their suppliers fast. Sometimes it might be lack of intent that prevents large corporates from paying SMEs, but I'm sure that very often it's actually lack of ability because they're not set up to move funds very quickly. And that's in part a matter of maybe not always being aware of or having done the groundwork to access NPP, which I'm sure a lot of us here think that's probably something they could benefit from. But also it's then the reconciliation component. Can you receive funds in real time, reconcile in real time, and then give an instruction to pay out in real time? If you can do that, then the idea of doing payment runs is going to look very quickly like the 1880s that it actually is.
And Lance, if I can just add,
yeah, I think Christian's being rather kind on large corporates, because I'm not sure it's the systems that's slowing down the payment speed. But anyway, Julie, yes?
Oh, yes, I was just going to say, I think banks have certainly adopted and embraced APIs in the last few years. Certainly from a Swift perspective, we've built out a lot of new APIs that really help that end-to-end customer experience, speaking about making sure that the sending bank knows when the receiving bank has credited the funds to the customer account, and then really driving that experience back to the sending customer. So developing APIs so that sending customer can actually understand that the payment's been made, really driving out those service levels. And I think ISO, again, also helps in this space, particularly in reconciliation. ISO 20022, which allows richer data, allows the customers to implement their invoice numbers and their referencing, and to really make sure if we can implement request to pay, that information coming straight back into ERPs, to allow reconciliation, and with those APIs that, between banks actually confirm funds have been posted, you get that seamless end-to-end experience across the payment system.
Right. So picking up on one of your points, Julie and Christian, your business is providing extra value to the users, presumably because of the straight-through processing capability that you can provide to them, which is taking cost out of their business. And that's really why businesses, at least historically, have been prepared to pay for payments, because some of the value-added processes can actually reduce their cost base. And you don't have that opportunity really in consumers. Is that the case, Christian, that your focus has been on that straight-through processing?
That's exactly right. The idea is that if you are an Australian business owner and you have slightly more complex payment flows, if you are an SME sort of around the corner, then companies like Monoova are probably a bit overkill. You probably don't have the kinds of management issues with payments that we're trying to solve. But if you're one with reasonably complex flows or very large ongoing complex flows, it makes zero sense that you should be spending your capital and time on building payment management systems. It is too complex, both from a regulatory point of view and from a technical point of view nowadays. I mean, a lot of banks don't even build their own payment flows and sort of back-end machinery anymore. It's akin to, at one point in the distant past, the first thing you did was to build your own office furniture, first day of work. At some point, they realized actually the carpenter was better suited to doing that. And we think we're now at the same point with payments. Even if you can spend the money, maybe you have $100 million lying around to build this amazing payment system, it doesn't make any sense because that's not actually why you're there. That's not what you come to work to do. So what we do, we make it possible to outsource the management of your payment flows. And you're absolutely right, Lance. I mean, as if I had scripted your question, which I assure the two people who are listening that that I hadn't. It is exactly right. You reduce costs and you increase security. And just the risk of human error, the risk that you uploaded the wrong spreadsheet, or that you don't understand exactly what happened, you just get a failure, the full ABA file, so the sort of direct entry file failed. Well, that's not very helpful. You're gonna, sure, maybe 99% of all transactions are correct, but you spend 99% of your time on one that aren't. And so it's a lot about cost reduction, risk reduction, and efficiency gain to make people do the stuff that they're actually there to do, which is servicing their clients. Their clients probably don't care exactly how payments, as long as how payments are run, as long as they do run.
Yeah. And Katrina, you've now had some experience in the market here as the MPP is ramped up. What sort of advice could you give to a new entrant like Steve over in New Zealand as to some of the opportunities and pitfalls that he's likely to come across?
Sure, certainly. I think the point that we've just been talking about around the sort of the role that APIs play. I think probably actually initially when the platform went live, I think collectively the industry underestimated how important that was, and I think to Christian's point, those APIs are really the kind of the bridge that really enable that kind of end-to-end information flow and the ability to actually automate some of those key processes that are really going to deliver the benefits to corporates. The real-time payments infrastructure kind of only goes so far in terms of, sort of really facilitating how payments move between banks, but it's actually what happens at the edges that's really going to drive that value. Although, I think having said, APIs are important. I think certainly New Zealand, has been on that API journey for quite a few years now, and maybe they've actually got some lessons that we could learn from them too as to how to do that. I think from a platform perspective, access was really important for us as well in terms of ensuring that there were a number of different access options that are available for a whole range of different organisations to participate in the platform. Another one was around what actual kind of native capability needs to be at the centre that all different organisations can utilise in different ways. So as Adrian spoke about this morning, our focus as the platform infrastructure operator is around what's that kind of different building blocks of capability that we need to have and associated rules around it that enable all sorts of different organisations to utilise that capability. And it's about how do you basically make sure that then a third party can just leverage it outside of the platform, incorporate it into their own product and service offering, just like Monoova is doing today, that will enable different parties to make and receive real-time payments. And I think it's also about that capability development needs to be broad, build it once, but be able to use it for multiple different use cases. Because, certainly in Australia, where we do have the challenge of a kind of distributed architectural model, it is quite a lot of effort to get the banks to basically implement change and getting everyone to sort of do that at the same time. And I think certainly probably one of the things that has surprised us is the value of Pay ID from a kind of confirmation of payee perspective. We always knew that it was going to be important from a customer perspective. I can actually get confirmation of who I'm paying. What we've actually seen in the market is actually there's a lot of business application around that as well, and actually having that kind of verification and additional kind of checks built into those processes that can add value as well. And I think really about that, the data journey has probably been one of the biggest learnings that we were talking about, is you've actually got to think about that really end to end. And I think initially we were maybe a bit too focused on what happens between banks, but actually you've got to think about the whole ecosystem and what happens right from the beginning all the way to the other end.
Christian, you want to add something?
Yes, please. I actually think one thing that certainly has been working quite well in Australia, sort of adding to what Katrina is saying, sort of lessons from here. And maybe to a lot of people's surprise, Australia isn't famous for having nimble banks that are super easy to work with. But I would say that, amid other complications that may or may not be there, the thing that's worked very well is the collaboration. I would say that Katrina, in her personal capacity, as sort of managing the outreach program and the partnership programs on BA's part, but actually a lot of the banking partners, the participant institutions, as they're called here, I think have understood, as you're saying, Katrina, the edges of their roles and what do they do well and what part do they play in the ecosystem around NTP. And so what I would say is probably a more generally drawn lesson is that involving different types of players reasonably early on, I think, has been very successful here. Because banks do some things really, really well, but they're probably not the biggest technology providers. It's not what their core product offering is. That's not what they're there to do. We, on the other hand, would be a really, really bad bank, but we're pretty good at technology. And so being able to work, as you say, Katrina, at sort of the edges. So money has moved between Bank A and Bank B, but how do we make sure that people know about it who need to know about it at the time they need to know about it? Well, that's where someone like us can come in. And then, to be clear, we are generally servicing platforms that service other businesses in turn. So I don't have great experience that I can draw on to create the perfect experience for real estate agents, for instance. But we service businesses that know exactly what real estate agents need. So they, in turn, can provide then beautiful user interfaces to make it easy for real estate agents to collect rent and pay landlords and pay council rates and utility bills and whatever else it is. And so everyone plays their part. And it's, I think, really coming together that has meant that MPP isn't just something that happens between one banking portal and the next. It's increasingly the way that people operate, and it's become increasingly the way that people expect money to flow. And in some ways, we just become almost like a distribution channel for our participating bank. So we're working with one of the banks here, Cascal, and they do their bit, we then do our next, they carry on. And I think that's worked quite well.
But playing devil's advocate against that, Christian, it sounds like more and more people are going to get a clip of the ticket as it goes through. I'm bringing all these extra people into the value chain, and each one of them is going to want a profit margin on their piece of the action.
That's true, but I think there it's important to think about how you charge and what you charge for. So you could try to be, you can try to do what people have been doing for a very long time and charge on your cost, or you can try to start charging on your value. So if you're providing value, if someone only wants money to move from A to B, and they think, I don't mind having to sit at my banking portal every day, all the time to get the real-time experience, fine. Then you shouldn't actually come to us, and you shouldn't come to our clients or our clients' customers. You probably got everything you need. There's no need to sort of create a problem just to solve it. But if you need something else, then really what you're asking us to do isn't to give you the dollar, it's to give you the information about the dollar in real time in your system. And that is then something that you are actually willing to pay for. Just like you could say, well, sounds really complicated if you want to buy a car and someone's providing the wheels and someone else doing the horn and the third one, the seatbelts. Sure, but it depends on what you want to enjoy. What are the features that you require? And if you are charging on features, then all of a sudden as a client, you get a lot of control over your cost, because you can say, you know what, we're going to be fine without those wheels. We're going to pay for a slightly lower tier this month, or that really matters to us, or we need pay IDs or we don't. Like, it actually becomes a matter of control, and as opposed to just a matter of how many transactions are coming.
Steve, how do you think this is? Oh, sorry, Katrina.
Sorry. I think I would maybe, in response to that as well, I think if you've got the right capabilities as relates to the real-time payments infrastructure and it's available to different organisations at the edges, yes, you might have different organisations involved in that value chain, but I think it actually then opens it up to competition and innovation as well in terms of what different organisations can offer to different customer segments. And that's where it gets really exciting.
Yep.
And Steve, I mean, New Zealand's obviously a smaller market than Australia. Is there room for all these different specialists to play in the market? I mean, one of the things that's unique about your card system is your switch to issuer model, which effectively stops the transaction going to the acquirer, stops the transaction going to a scheme in order to take cost out of it.
Yeah, we are a small market. Most of us are related to one another, given the size of the country. But what's the big question for us is making that core decision of where we cooperate, where we compete. And I think that's one thing that we are pretty good at in terms of knowing where we should be in a competitive environment, whereas where we should actually join forces and collaborate. So if we keep going down that track, I think there will be room. I think it's fair to say that we've always been pretty innovative in terms of some of those payment solutions. So I'm not too worried that it is a small market, because it is also very much a test bed. Let's try some things here. And what we found with a lot of Kiwi companies, that they may start it here, but they go and make their money in the US or the UK or across Asia. So there's a couple of really successful New Zealand-based payment companies that are actually all their businesses across Asia, not here, but they started here.
Katrina?
Yeah, I think Steve makes a really important point around that kind of what's collaborative and what's competitive space. And I think that was probably, also one of the lessons with the MPP here in Australia, and one of the success points was to really focus on where is there value in the banks basically collaborating and agreeing on how do you have standardisation and where you need consistency, and where is the competitive space that you then leave it up to banks and other third parties to then really look at what their specific product and service offerings are. And I think actually having that kind of agreement up front is really important.
All right. Julie, anything to add?
I think I'd just add that similar to NPP being an open ecosystem and supporting, banks and fintechs and other organisations alike, the new Swift transaction management platform is adopting a similar approach and really thinking about an open ecosystem to allow banks to offer services that they might want to offer to the community, to allow fintechs to also provide different APIs and services to the community and other organisations as well. So I think one key important point is about that open ecosystem that NPP offers, and that Swift will also offer from its new transaction management platform that New Zealand should consider as part of its implementation.
And Steve, the New Zealand market is probably more exposed to cross-border payments than most, because you're such a big exporter of different products, which you need to be because of the size of the country. Do real-time payments bring opportunities and challenges to that part of the ecosystem?
Yes, it does, because if we look at, say, Swift's GPI process and so on, if you're sending from a real-time system into a batch jurisdiction, it's a batch experience from a customer's point of view. So I think that pressure is already being felt in terms of, if we want to get better at that cross-border, yes, we need to be able to match the jurisdiction's capability at both ends, so as we can do that straight through processing and transaction type. So yes, it will play a role in terms of creating some greater impetus and need to actually get on with this.
We got a question from the audience about the ability of companies that are receiving MPP transactions or real-time transactions, which are cleared one at a time, whether there are reconciliation issues with those transactions as opposed to running a batch file through your accounts. Katrina or Christian, you want to grab hold of that?
I'll cede the floor to Katrina on this one.
So, I mean, certainly with if an organisation is used to operating in batch, then suddenly getting a whole bunch of individual payments kind of coming in can cause problems, and a number of the financial institutions that are looking to support processing bulk payment files across the MPP are looking at, from a kind of accounting and reconciliation perspective, how do you then actually kind of group all of that back up together? So if I'm receiving a whole range of payments, it's actually being consolidated and I'm not being flooded with a whole bunch of different individual payments. I think also from an outbound perspective as well, in terms of looking at how you do that in a bulk payment perspective. And that's why we've actually extended things like our API framework to basically say, if you are doing a bulk payment, how do you actually then do that in batch, and how do you kind of reconcile the two? So there is work that the financial institutions will need to do at the edges, and potentially other kind of third parties can do as well to help kind of make some of those processes easier for a corporate to move from a batch system over to the MPP. But certainly that is an area that we're expecting to see quite a lot of activity start to ramp up next year, as a number of the banks start to look at how they move those payments across to the MPP.
Okay, we're about to run out of time, so I'll just do a last statement from each of you to wrap up the session. I might start with you, Julie.
I think it's great to be here, and Swift is really focusing on instant and frictionless payments with its new strategy, and looking forward to working with the community with that implementation.
And Steve?
We'll be releasing on our website the payments modernisation plan. Real-time payments is clearly on that, and as I said to begin with, it's a very loud beep on our radar, and we need to catch up.
Katrina?
I think sort of, real-time payments is becoming the norm around the world everywhere, and I think it's a really exciting space and a really exciting time. And I think that journey is just beginning for us in Australia. And I think, certainly we'd be keen to work with our friends across the sea to see how can we help ensure that actually there's opportunities for corporates in both markets, and how do we kind of work together there. And I think particularly as it relates to when you open up to new capability like payment initiation and the mandated payment service that we didn't kind of really get to touch on, then there's a whole raft of whole different use cases, and it actually becomes really much more exciting in terms of what can be done.
And Christian?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Katrina. It's mandated payment service, which we're going to be part of very early on. It is something that is going to transform payments again in Australia. It's quite a feat by MPPA to get onto 2 revolutions in a matter of 3 years. But these are long overdue revolutions, and I think everyone agrees on that. So what we're doing is we're arriving at the 21st century at 20 years into it. But when we do so at speed, and I think with significant momentum. So it's exciting. Thank you, everyone.
Well, your next job might be to move the USA to the 21st century of payments.
I think it's not going to be just a matter of payments on that front. I think there are a few other things that might have to be resolved.
Anyway,
it will take longer than a century.
Thank you to the 4 of you for a great panel discussion. Look forward to talking to you again. I'm going to hand back to the organisers now. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Appreciate it.
Bye.